My name is Isabella Carter. I am 38 years old, and I am a renowned chef. I was born in the United States, but for years I have lived in Barcelona, Spain, where I built my career in fine dining. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. An award-winning restaurant, international recognition, and a daily routine surrounded by luxury and sophistication. But deep inside, something was missing. No matter how much success I achieved, I felt an inexplicable emptiness. That feeling led me on a spiritual quest, one that would change my life forever. At the peak of this search, I started fasting, not just as a dietary discipline, but as a deeper, spiritual practice. On the 10th day of a water-only fast, I was involved in a terrible accident. A runaway bus ran a red light and crashed into my car with full force. The impact was devastating, leaving me with severe internal injuries. For 14 minutes, I was clinically dead. But my story didn't end there. During those minutes, I was taken to a place beyond human understanding. God revealed deep truths about life, the spiritual world, and something few people truly grasp: the power of fasting. What he showed me completely transformed my understanding of existence, purpose, and the unseen battle happening all around us. I returned to life with a mission: to share this revelation and teach what I learned. What I saw and heard in that heavenly realm was not a dream, not a hallucination. It was real. And today, I want to share this experience with you. If you're watching this, I believe it's not by chance. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. That morning, something felt different. I couldn't explain it, but there was a stillness in the air, a quiet that wasn't normal for a city as alive as Barcelona. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that makes you pause, the kind that makes you feel as if something is about to change. I had been fasting for 10 days, drinking only water and herbal tea. My body felt light, almost weightless, but my mind was sharper than ever. There was a clarity in my thoughts, a sense of awareness that was difficult to put into words. It was as if I was seeing the world through a different lens, sensing things I had never noticed before. I had spent the morning in prayer and reflection, something that had become increasingly natural during my fasting journey. Over the past few days, I had felt closer to God than I ever had in my entire life. It was as if the noise of the world had faded, and for the first time, I could truly hear him. But that morning, there was something else, a heaviness in my spirit, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. Looking back, I wonder if that was God's way of preparing me for what was about to happen. I had a speaking engagement that afternoon about the connection between food, fasting, and spirituality. It was an event I had been looking forward to, as I had begun incorporating faith into my teachings, realizing that food nourished not only the body but also the soul. As I got into my car, I took a deep breath and whispered a simple prayer. God, guide me today. I don't know why I said those words at that moment. It wasn't something I usually did before driving, but that day, it felt necessary. Barcelona was as busy as ever, cars honking, people rushing down the sidewalks, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery nearby. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden hue as I made my way through the familiar streets. Everything seemed normal, but then, something shifted. For a brief moment, everything slowed down. I don't know how to describe it, but it was as if time itself had paused. The noise of the city faded into the background, and I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, my breathing slowed, and my heart pounded in my chest. It was an eerie feeling, like standing on the edge of something unknown. Then, in a split second, everything went black. A bus came out of nowhere, speeding through a red light. It was going too fast, way too fast. I didn't even have time to react. I remember the deafening crash, the sound of metal twisting and breaking, the shattering of glass, the force of the impact crushing my body. My car spun violently, the world outside turning into a blur. I felt my head snap forward, then backward, and then nothing. I wasn't in my car anymore. I was somewhere else. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I could see the wreckage, the chaos unfolding below me. People were running toward my car, some screaming, others frozen in shock. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their voices urgent as they worked frantically to revive me. I saw their hands pressing against my chest, their lips moving as they counted each compression. I saw the flashing lights of the ambulance, the expressions of horror on the faces of bystanders. And then, I saw myself. I was lying there, completely still. My face was pale, my body lifeless. I was dead. But the strangest thing was that I felt no fear, no pain, no panic. Instead, I felt an overwhelming peace, a peace that didn't make sense given the chaos below. It was as if I had stepped into a different realm, one where time didn't exist, where there was no pain, no sorrow, no weight of the world. I wasn't floating, but I wasn't standing either. I just was. And in that moment, I knew. I was no longer in the physical world. For 14 minutes, I was clinically dead. But during those minutes, something extraordinary happened. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the power of the unseen. I always thought that death would be terrifying, that if I ever faced it, I would feel panic, regret, or unbearable pain. But when the moment came, there was none of that. There was no suffering, no fear. Instead, I felt something completely unexpected, a weightless peace, as if I had been released from everything that had ever burdened me. I didn't feel the crushing force of the accident, the broken bones, or the devastation of my injuries. It was as if I had simply stepped out of my body and into something beyond human understanding. I was still aware. I could think. I could feel. But my thoughts were clearer than they had ever been before, as if my mind had been stripped of all distractions and noise. I wasn't bound by my body, yet I was still me. I looked down and saw everything, the wreckage of my car, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement, the growing crowd of people watching in shock. I saw the paramedics working desperately, their hands moving rapidly as they pressed down on my chest, trying to restart my heart. And then, I saw my own face. It was the most surreal moment of my existence, looking at myself from the outside. My body lay completely motionless, pale, almost unrecognizable. It was unsettling, yet I felt no urge to return. I knew, without anyone telling me, that my body was nothing more than a shell. The real me, the essence of who I was, had already moved beyond it. Then I felt it. A presence. At first it was subtle, like a shift in the air, a warmth that wasn't coming from the world below. Then, it became undeniable. Something was pulling me upward, gently, but with a force I couldn't resist. I wasn't floating, I wasn't flying, yet I was rising. It was as if I had stepped onto an invisible path leading towards something unknown, something vast. I looked up. Above me there was light, but not just any light. It wasn't the harsh glare of the sun or the artificial brightness of streetlights. It was something else entirely, alive, radiant, all-encompassing. It didn't hurt to look at. In fact, the more I gazed at it, the more I felt drawn toward it. There was a warmth in it, a familiarity, as if I had known it forever. Then, the world around me began to fade away. The sirens, the voices, the city lights, they all became distant, as if they belonged to a place that no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't scared. I wasn't questioning what was happening. There was an unspoken understanding within me, a knowing that this was the beginning of something greater. I was being called somewhere, and so I followed. The sensation of movement was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't like walking or flying. It was something beyond that. I was traveling without effort, moving without motion. The light grew stronger, enveloping everything around me. And then I noticed something remarkable. I wasn't alone. All around me, figures of light moved in the same direction, ascending toward something magnificent. They weren't shadows, nor were they like any human form I had ever seen. They were pure presence, filled with energy and peace. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel them, radiating love, kindness, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. Then, a realization struck me. I was leaving everything behind. The life I had built, the things I had worked for, my restaurant, my dreams, my fears, even my own name. None of it mattered in that moment. The only thing that remained was who I truly was, stripped of all earthly attachments. And somehow, that didn't scare me. It felt right. For the first time, I understood that this world, the one I had spent so many years obsessing over, was only a fraction of reality. There was so much more, something greater, something eternal. And I was about to see it. I cannot say exactly when I crossed over, because time, as we understand it, didn't exist there. One moment, I was moving through the light, weightless and free, and the next, I was somewhere else, a place unlike anything I had ever seen before. At first, all I could perceive was a brightness, so pure, so alive, that it felt like it was embracing me from the inside out. But this light wasn't just light. It carried a presence, a warmth that reached the deepest parts of my soul. It wasn't cold or distant like the sun. It wasn't artificial like a flame. It was alive. It was intelligent. And it filled me with something I had never truly understood before: perfect love. As my eyes adjusted, or perhaps as my spirit adjusted, I began to see. And what I saw was beyond anything the human mind could comprehend. I stood in a place that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The sky above me wasn't just blue, it was alive. Colors shimmered and moved as if they were breathing. The air itself carried a presence, a harmony that made every part of me feel whole. The ground beneath me wasn't solid like earth, yet I could stand. It was as if the very fabric of reality was different here, lighter, more vibrant, more real than anything I had ever known. Then I heard it. Music. Not music in the way we know it. There were no instruments, no notes being played, yet it was the most beautiful melody I had ever heard. It wasn't just a sound. It was woven into the very atmosphere, filling everything with a sense of awe and reverence. Every part of me resonated with it, as if my very being was made to hear this sound. It was then that I realized something even more incredible. The light itself was singing. It was worship. It was as if all of existence in that place was praising something far greater than itself. And the more I listened, the more I understood. Every note, every sound, every vibration carried meaning. It was pure adoration, overflowing with joy, peace, and something even deeper, the presence of God Himself. And then, I saw it. Above me, stretching between heaven and earth, was a golden network of light, countless threads intertwining, forming what looked like an endless web. But these weren't just lights. They were something else, something sacred. As I looked closer, understanding dawned upon me. They were prayers. Every single thread in that radiant expanse represented a prayer, a whisper, a cry, a desperate plea from earth reaching into heaven. They moved, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to breathe life itself. Some were thin, flickering like candle flames, while others burned strong and unshakable, forming bridges between the physical and the divine. Then I noticed something even more astonishing. Some of these golden threads were stronger than others. They shone brighter, as if carrying more power, more intensity. And suddenly, I knew what they were. They were created through fasting. I cannot explain how I knew, but the truth was simply there, imprinted in my very being. I was witnessing the unseen connection between humanity and heaven, and fasting was the key. The prayers of those who sacrificed, who denied themselves for the sake of drawing closer to God, created the most unbreakable bonds, forming bridges that reached straight into the heart of the divine. And then, I heard his voice. It wasn't like any voice I had ever heard before. It didn't come from outside of me, nor did it come from within. It came from everywhere. It surrounded me, filled me, resonated in every fiber of my being. It was powerful, yet gentle. Commanding, yet full of love. It wasn't just sound, it was a presence. And he spoke my name. Isabella. The moment I heard it, I fell to my knees. Not because I was afraid, but because the sheer weight of his glory was overwhelming. The name I had carried all my life, my identity, my existence, everything that I was, felt different when he spoke it. It was as if, for the first time, I was hearing it the way it was always meant to be spoken. And then, he revealed something that shook me to my core. Fasting is more than sacrifice. It is a portal, a key to unlock my presence in the world. I had always thought of fasting as a spiritual discipline, a way to cleanse the body and focus the mind. But at that moment, I understood the true power behind it. Fasting wasn't just about self-denial, it was about alignment. It was a way for the spirit to override the flesh, a direct channel between heaven and earth. I looked up at the golden threads again, and I saw how some of them pierced through darkness, breaking through barriers, shattering strongholds, unleashing divine power upon the world. And then, God spoke again. Few understand the power they hold, but those who do, those who seek me through fasting and prayer, change the course of history. I was trembling now. Not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what I was witnessing. Everything I had known, everything I had ever believed, was being reshaped before my very eyes. And then, he asked me a question that would change my life forever. Will you tell them? At that moment, I knew my time here was limited. I knew that I had been shown something sacred, something not meant to be kept to myself. I had been sent back to carry this message, to tell the world what I had seen. The moment God asked me, "Will you tell them?" I felt something shift. The golden threads of prayer still shimmered in the air, stretching between heaven and earth. But my focus was no longer on them. I was overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what I had just seen. The power of fasting, the connection it forged between humanity and the divine. It was something I had never fully understood, not until now. But before I could even process the magnitude of the revelation, I felt a presence approaching me. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't startling. It was gentle, yet commanding, like the slow but undeniable rise of the sun after a long night. My spirit knew, before I even turned to look, that I was no longer alone. And then, I saw him. He was standing there, just a short distance from me, bathed in a light that wasn't coming from the golden sky above, but from within him. His presence was overwhelming. It was holiness, but not the kind I had imagined. It wasn't distant or unapproachable. It was the purest love I had ever felt, so intense it made my heart ache. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. And then, he called my name. Isabella. At that moment, I fell to my knees, not because I was forced to, not because I felt unworthy, though I did, but because when you stand in the presence of Jesus, your soul knows. It recognizes him. Every fiber of my being, every cell, every thought, every emotion, everything inside me responded to him. I had spent years searching for meaning, for purpose, for something that would fill the emptiness inside me. I had chased success, praise, and recognition. I had built a life around creating meals, experiences, moments, always believing that fulfillment would come from the work of my hands. But now, in his presence, I realized something so profound it shattered me. I had been searching for him all along. Jesus walked toward me, and as he did, something invisible yet powerful radiated from him. It was peace. But not just any peace, it was alive. It entered me, filled every broken place inside me, reached the corners of my soul that I didn't even know were wounded. Tears streamed down my face. I wasn't just looking at Jesus, I was seeing love itself. Then, he spoke. You have seen what few understand. Fasting is not just discipline, it is the key to my presence. His voice wasn't like anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just sound. It was truth itself. It didn't just enter my ears, it entered my soul. I felt it inside me, like a reality I had always known but had forgotten. He continued, when you fast, you silence the flesh so that the spirit may hear me clearly. You open the gates for my power to move upon the earth. Through fasting, you break chains, you intercede for nations, you bring heaven closer. As he spoke, visions appeared before me, as if I was watching history unfold right in front of my eyes. I saw Queen Esther trembling in her chamber, fasting before approaching the king to save her people from destruction. I saw Elijah, weak and exhausted in the wilderness, sustained only by God as he fasted for 40 days before encountering the Almighty on Mount Horeb. I saw Daniel kneeling in his room, fasting as he received visions of the future, visions so powerful they shaped empires. But then I saw something else. I saw people unknown to history, men and women whose names were never recorded in books, people who had fasted in secret, in their homes, in their churches, on their knees in the middle of the night. And yet, their fasting had changed the course of events on earth. I saw wars stopped, disasters averted, revivals ignited, all because someone, somewhere, had fasted and prayed. Jesus turned his eyes toward me. The world is entering a time when fasting will no longer be optional. It will be necessary. His words carried weight, a divine urgency. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew it was serious. Something was coming, a time when people would either rise in spiritual power or be swept away by the darkness. Those who humble themselves in fasting and prayer will carry my light into the darkness, but those who do not will struggle to stand. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask what was coming, why this revelation was being given to me. But I couldn't. Because deep, inside, I already knew the answer. Something was shifting in the world. The spiritual realm was moving, preparing for something great, yet terrifying. And fasting, this ancient, often forgotten discipline, was about to become one of the greatest weapons in the hands of those who walked with God. Jesus reached out his hand toward me. The moment his fingers touched my forehead, I was consumed by light. And then, I woke up. I gasped, my lungs filling with air. My body jerked violently as if something had just pulled me back into the world of the living. Voices shouted around me. Machines beeped wildly. I could hear the frantic murmurs of doctors and nurses. I was lying in a hospital bed. I was alive. But I was no longer the same. The moment my eyes opened in the hospital, I knew something had changed. My body was weak, my mind still adjusting, but my soul was different. It was as if I had been rewritten, as if something deep within me had been unlocked. I could still feel the presence of Jesus, his words echoing inside me. Fasting is not just discipline, it is the key to my presence. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my breath uneven, as flashes of what I had seen in that divine realm ran through my mind like fire. The golden threads, the visions of history, the revelation that fasting had shaped the fate of nations. I had never realized it before, but fasting had been woven into some of the most pivotal moments of human existence. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I saw it again. The scenes Jesus had shown me, unfolding before me like an eternal truth. I saw a young Jewish woman kneeling in the candle-lit chamber of a Persian palace, her breath shaking as she whispered her final prayer before the dawn. Queen Esther. She had declared a fast, not just for herself, but for her people, because she knew that if God did not intervene, the entire Jewish race would be wiped from existence. 3 days, no food, no water. Desperation drove her to seek the face of the Almighty, and because she did, history changed. Instead of annihilation, her people were saved. One woman's fasting altered the course of an empire. Then, I saw a lone man in the wilderness, his clothes worn, his body frail, yet his spirit blazing with divine strength. Moses. 40 days and 40 nights on the mountaintop, his flesh subdued, his soul in full communion with God. And when he returned to his people, his face shone with the radiance of heaven itself. It was through that fast that the very commandments of God were given. The vision shifted, and I saw a prophet collapsed under a tree, weak from hunger, exhausted from running. Elijah. He had fled, desperate and broken, convinced that his life was over. But then an angel touched him, strengthening him, giving him just enough sustenance to sustain. Another 40-day fast. A fast that led him to the mountain of God, where he would hear the whisper of the Almighty and receive his divine mission. Then, I saw something even greater. I saw a man standing in the desert, clothed in humility, but burning with power. Jesus. 40 days, alone, fasting, resisting the temptations of the enemy, preparing for the greatest ministry the world had ever seen. Before he healed the sick, before he cast out demons, before he even spoke his first sermon, he fasted. And then, I saw people whose names history would never record. Ordinary men and women, kneeling in hidden places, their faces pressed to the ground, their bodies weak from fasting but their spirits aflame. They weren't kings. They weren't prophets. They were the unseen intercessors, people who fasted for their families, for their cities, for nations they would never set foot in. I saw the invisible battle they were fighting, the spiritual walls that crumbled because of their prayers, the forces of darkness retreating at the power of their sacrifice. And then, Jesus' words rang in my spirit again. Few understand the power they hold, but those who do, those who seek me through fasting and prayer, change the course of history. I gasped, my body jerking in the hospital bed as my spirit returned fully to the present. My hands were trembling. My heart was racing. I finally understood. Fasting was never just about food. It was about surrender. It was about aligning with heaven. It was about silencing the flesh so that the spirit could rise, about unlocking divine power in a way that nothing else could. And now I had seen it with my own eyes. But why now? Why had Jesus revealed this to me? That's when I heard his voice one final time. Because the time is coming when my people must rise. They must remember what has been forgotten. They must return to the weapons I have given them. The days ahead will demand it. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't fully understand what was coming, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Fasting was about to become more necessary than ever. As I lay in that hospital bed, my mind racing, my heart pounding with the weight of what had been revealed to me, one thought refused to leave my spirit. Why now? Why had Jesus chosen to show me this revelation in this moment? What was coming that would make fasting not just an act of devotion, but an absolute necessity? I closed my eyes, and in an instant, I was there again. Not in the hospital, not in the physical world, but back in that divine presence, where time didn't exist, where everything was revealed in a way that went beyond human understanding. And I saw it. The world as we know it, changing, shifting, unraveling. I saw nations trembling, the foundations of society shaking, unseen forces, waging war in the spiritual realm while most of the world remained blind to it. I saw a time when faith alone would no longer be enough, not because God had changed, but because the battle was intensifying. The darkness was growing stronger, not because evil had become more powerful, but because people had forgotten how to fight. I saw churches filled with people who no longer knew how to pray. People who claimed to believe in God but had no authority in the Spirit. Their prayers were weak, empty words with no fire, no power, because they had been disconnected from the source. Then I saw others, a remnant, a group of people, small in number but mighty in spirit. They weren't famous. They weren't standing on stages or seeking recognition. They were in hidden places, in their rooms, on their knees, in secret gatherings where the world couldn't see them. And they were fasting. Their bodies were weak, but their spirits burned like flames. Their prayers weren't just words, they were weapons, striking against the darkness, tearing down spiritual strongholds, shifting the atmosphere over cities and nations. I understood. The battle of the last days would not be won by those who simply believed in God. It would be won by those who walked in His power, and the key to that power was fasting. Then, I saw something even more terrifying. I saw the enemy moving, spreading deception like wildfire. I saw people being lulled into complacency, distracted, numb. They were being fed lies that dulled their senses, that convinced them fasting was outdated, unnecessary, extreme. They were being spiritually sedated, so that when the real battle came, they would be unarmed and defenseless. And then I heard the words, "If my people do not fast, they will not stand." It hit me like a shockwave. I realized why I had been shown all of this, why Jesus had revealed to me the threads of golden light, the power that fasting unleashed, the battles it had won throughout history. Because we were approaching a time when the battle would no longer be avoidable. Every person on earth would be forced to choose light or darkness, surrender or resistance, power or weakness. And fasting would be the difference between those who carried the fire of God and those who would be overcome by the darkness. I opened my eyes again, back in the hospital. But I wasn't the same. I knew what I had to do. I had to tell people. I had to make them understand. I had spent my whole life believing that food was the most powerful thing in the world, that what we ate could heal, that the right meal could transform. And yes, food has power. But what I had seen, what I had experienced in the very presence of Jesus, had shown me an even greater truth. Fasting unlocks something that nothing else can. It is not a religious practice. It is not just an act of discipline. It is a weapon, a key, a direct channel to divine power. And the time was coming when it would be the only thing strong enough to sustain God's people. I didn't know exactly when this battle would reach its peak, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The time to prepare was now. As I lay in that hospital bed, my body weak, but my spirit burning with a newfound urgency, a final truth settled deep into my soul. Fasting is not just something we do on earth. It is something that moves heaven and shakes the spiritual realm itself. I had seen it with my own eyes. Fasting was not just about personal discipline, not just about seeking clarity or spiritual enlightenment. It was a force, a shift, a ripple that spread beyond the physical and into the unseen. It wasn't just about denying the body, it was about unlocking power in the spirit. I had spent years believing that the most powerful things in life were visible, that success was measured by achievement, that power came from influence, that the impact of one's life could be seen and quantified. But what I had witnessed in my near-death experience shattered that illusion completely. The greatest battles are fought where no human eyes can see. I closed my eyes again, and as if my spirit was still connected to the revelation I had been given, I saw it once more. The unseen world, the realm where the true war was being fought. I saw something terrifying. There were forces of darkness, vast and organized, moving across the earth like a thick fog. They weren't random, they weren't chaotic. They had structure, purpose, and strategy. And their goal was clear: to weaken the saints, to silence their prayers, to sever their connection to God. I watched as people, good people, believers, struggled under the weight of oppression they couldn't even see. Anxiety, depression, addiction, distractions, a dulling of their spiritual senses. It was happening everywhere. They were losing battles they didn't even know they were fighting because they were fighting in the wrong realm, trying to solve spiritual problems with earthly solutions. But then, I saw something else. I saw people who had chosen to fight differently. They were not loud. They were not seeking attention. They were not trying to win battles with arguments, debates, or force. They were kneeling. They were fasting. And as they did, the golden threads I had seen before began to ignite, sending ripples of light through the darkness. Their sacrifice, giving up food, turning away from their fleshly desires, choosing to feed their spirit instead, was doing something no earthly power could accomplish. Chains were breaking in the unseen realm. Barriers that had been holding people back for years were being shattered. Strongholds that had existed for generations were collapsing. I saw cities where a single praying, fasting believer was causing an entire shift in the spiritual atmosphere, tearing down darkness not by their strength, but by the power fasting unlocked in the divine realm. Then, I heard the voice of the Lord once more, and his words shook me to my core. The enemy does not fear those who talk about me. He fears those who walk in my power, and my power is released through those who humble themselves, who seek me with fasting and prayer. I gasped, my spirit overwhelmed. I understood. This is why fasting has been so attacked. This is why the world has convinced people it's unnecessary, outdated, extreme. Because the enemy knows. A fasting believer is an unstoppable force. A person who fasts with understanding is not just resisting hunger, they are starving the flesh and feeding the spirit. They are tearing down unseen walls. They are shaking heaven and earth. And this is why Jesus himself fasted before he began his ministry. This is why Moses fasted before receiving the commandments. This is why Daniel fasted before receiving visions. This is why Esther fasted before saving a nation. This is why the early church fasted before every great move of God. Because fasting isn't just about you. Fasting is about access. Fasting is about transformation. Fasting is about shifting what seems unshakable. And I knew, as I sat there, my weak body recovering, my soul blazing with the fire of revelation, if the people of God do not return to fasting, they will remain powerless in the battles ahead. The enemy wasn't afraid of our words. He wasn't afraid of our church attendance. He wasn't afraid of our knowledge. But he was terrified of a church that knew how to fast. Because a church that fasts is a church that moves mountains. A church that fasts is a church that unlocks heaven's power. A church that fasts is a church that cannot be defeated. And as I sat there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this truth, I made a vow in my heart: I would never live the same way again. I woke up gasping for air, my body jolting as if I had been pulled back into reality by an unseen force. The bright lights of the hospital room felt harsh against my eyes. My ears filled with the distant hum of machines beeping and the hushed voices of doctors and nurses moving around me. For a moment, I felt completely disoriented. I wasn't in that divine realm anymore, but the weight of what I had just experienced still pressed heavily on my soul. I turned my head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in my body. The accident should have killed me. 14 minutes without a heartbeat. 14 minutes of death. And yet, here I was, alive, breathing, conscious. But I knew with every fiber of my being that I had not come back the same. Lying there, I could still hear his voice in my spirit, his words echoing inside me like a truth I would never be able to forget. Fasting is not just discipline, it is the key to my presence. I could see the golden threads again, stretching between heaven and earth, the prayers of the faithful woven into a divine network of intercession. I could still feel the weight of the revelation I had been given, that fasting wasn't just about personal devotion, but about unleashing power into the spiritual realm, breaking strongholds, shifting destinies, changing history. The doctors were astonished. They told me I had suffered serious internal injuries from the crash, yet there was something unexplainable about my condition. My body had begun to heal at an unnatural rate. What should have taken weeks, maybe months of recovery, was happening in mere days. Every test they ran came back bafflingly normal, despite the trauma my body had endured. One of the nurses, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned down and whispered, "Someone up there must really love you." She had no idea how true her words were. But as my physical body recovered, my spirit burned with a question I couldn't ignore. Why had I been sent back? Why had I been given this vision? I knew the answer deep down, but it terrified me. I had been given a mission, a responsibility. The moment Jesus had asked me, "Will you tell them?" my life had changed, forever. I hadn't just been revived. I had been commissioned. I spent hours in prayer, seeking clarity, trying to understand the fullness of what I was meant to do. The more I prayed, the more the memories of my near-death experience settled in my soul, becoming part of me in a way that went beyond words. This wasn't just something I had seen. This was something I knew. I had encountered the truth, and now I had to share it. The world needed to understand what had been forgotten, that fasting wasn't just an ancient practice, but a weapon, a direct line to divine power. It wasn't just for prophets and biblical heroes. It was for now, for us, for this generation. The realization filled me with urgency. I had to speak. I had to teach. I had to tell the world what I had seen. And yet, I hesitated. Would people even believe me? Would they listen? Or would they dismiss my experience as just another near-death story? Something extraordinary but ultimately ignorable? The enemy whispered doubts into my mind, trying to convince me that my voice wouldn't matter, that the world was too far gone to care about fasting, that people would laugh, would reject, would mock what I had to say. But then I remembered. I remembered what I had seen. The remnant, the ones who still prayed, who still fasted, who still sought God with everything they had. I remembered the light breaking through the darkness, the power unleashed when even one person humbled themselves before the Lord in fasting and prayer. I wasn't speaking to those who would mock me. I was speaking to them, the ones who were searching, who were desperate for more, who knew there had to be something deeper than the shallow spirituality so many had settled for. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered a single sentence that would shape the rest of my life. Yes, Lord, I will tell them. From that moment on, my path was clear. I was no longer just a chef, no longer just a woman who had built her life around food and success. I had been given a new calling, a new purpose, and I knew, without a doubt, that everything I had once cared about, fame, achievements, recognition, paled in comparison to what I had been shown. I had been given truth, and now I had to share it. The moment I left the hospital, I began to speak, first to friends, then to small groups, then to churches, and soon to people all over the world. Everywhere I went, I told them what I had seen, what Jesus had revealed, what fasting truly meant. And something incredible happened. People began to wake up. I met men and women who had been searching for a deeper connection with God, but didn't know where to start. I met believers who had struggled for years with spiritual stagnation, not realizing that fasting was the missing key to unlocking what they had been longing for. I met people who had never considered fasting, but, after hearing my testimony, felt a burning desire to try. And when they did, they experienced breakthroughs they had never imagined possible. And then, something even more extraordinary happened. As more and more people embraced fasting, I started hearing testimonies, stories of chains being broken, of prayers being answered, of miracles happening. Not just small things, but huge shifts in people's lives, addictions broken, marriages restored, spiritual eyes opened, healings that doctors couldn't explain, revival beginning to spark in places where faith had once seemed dead. I realized then that this wasn't just my mission, it was ours. This wasn't just about what God had shown me, it was about what He was doing in this time, in this generation, in this world. The urgency I had felt in that heavenly realm was real. The battle was intensifying, the darkness was moving, and the only ones who would stand were those who knew how to fight. This is why I was sent back. Not just to share a story, but to ignite a movement, to remind people of what had been lost, to call them back to the ancient paths, to the discipline that the enemy had tried so hard to bury. Because fasting was never meant to be an afterthought. It was meant to be a way of life. It was meant to be the bridge between heaven and earth. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I know one thing with absolute certainty. I was not brought back just to live. I was brought back to awaken others. Because the time is short. The battle is real. And if we do not rise, if we do not return to the power we were meant to carry, we will find ourselves defenseless in the days ahead. But for those who do rise, for those who embrace fasting, who humble themselves before the Lord, who seek Him with everything they have, there will be power like never before. There will be revival. There will be fire. There will be miracles. Because when God's people fast and pray, He moves. And the time to move is now. As I look back on everything that has happened, on the accident, the 14 minutes I spent outside of time, the revelation that was placed into my hands, I realized something undeniable. None of this was about me. It was never about my life, my career, my successes, or even my survival. It was about something far greater, something that had been in motion long before I was ever born. I was simply given a glimpse, a momentary unveiling of a truth that had always existed but had been forgotten by many. Fasting was never meant to be optional. It was never meant to be just another religious tradition, an ancient practice confined to the pages of Scripture. It was meant to be a lifeline, a connection between heaven and earth, a direct channel, through which God's power could move freely. And yet, so many have dismissed it, neglected it, or misunderstood it. They have traded their spiritual authority for comfort, their divine inheritance for convenience, and in doing so, they have unknowingly weakened themselves for the battles ahead. I know now why I was sent back. I was sent back to be a voice, not the only voice, not the most important voice, but one among many who are being called in this hour to wake people up. Because the time is short. The battle is already underway. And whether we realize it or not, we are all part of it. I want you to stop for a moment and ask yourself something. When was the last time you truly hungered for God? Not just believed in Him, not just prayed when it was convenient, not just attended a church service out of routine, but truly hungered? When was the last time your soul ached for more, when you felt the pull to go deeper, to seek Him beyond words, beyond rituals, beyond what was comfortable? When was the last time you laid aside everything, your food, your distractions, your excuses, just to be in His presence? I ask you this because I believe, I know, that if you are hearing this, it is not by accident. There are no coincidences in the kingdom of God. If you are here, if these words have reached you, then it is because He is calling you. He is stirring something inside you. He is waking you up to something you may have sensed before but have never fully grasped. Maybe you have felt it. The restlessness, the unease, the feeling that something in the world is shifting, that something unseen is moving beneath the surface. Maybe you've looked around and sensed that we are approaching a time of decision, a moment where faith will no longer be something casual, but something that either holds us firm or allows us to fall. If that is you, then hear me clearly. This is your call to return. Return to the place of prayer. Return to the discipline of fasting. Return to the presence of God with a hunger so deep that nothing in this world can satisfy it. Because the days ahead will not be easy. The battles that are coming will require a strength that cannot be found in human effort alone. There will be those who stand, and there will be those who fall. And the difference will be who is prepared. I don't say this to scare you. I say this because I have seen it. I have felt it. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those who take fasting seriously, those who understand its power and embrace it, not as a burden, but as a privilege, will walk in a level of authority that will shake the very foundations of the earth. The enemy does not fear those who casually believe. He does not fear those who go through the motions of faith without depth, but he trembles before those who are willing to deny themselves, who are willing to sacrifice comfort to gain heaven's power. He trembles before those who fast. Because fasting makes you dangerous. Fasting strips away the distractions of the flesh and awakens the spirit to hear God's voice with clarity. Fasting humbles the soul, aligning your desires with the will of the Father. Fasting breaks chains that prayer alone cannot break. Fasting strengthens the weak, revives the weary, and unlocks the kind of faith that moves mountains. I have seen what fasting does in the spiritual realm. I have seen how it ignites the golden threads of prayer, how it tears through darkness, how it shakes principalities and powers that have held people captive for generations. And now, I am telling you, this power is in your hands. You do not need to be a prophet. You do not need to be a leader. You do not need to be anyone special in the eyes of the world. All you need is a heart willing to seek Him, a heart willing to surrender, a heart willing to fast. Because fasting is not just about food, it is about fire. The fire that refines, the fire that purifies, the fire that prepares a people who will not be shaken when the storm comes. And make no mistake, the storm is coming. Jesus did not call us to a passive faith. He did not call us to comfort. He called us to be warriors, to be watchmen, to be those who stand in the gap when the world is crumbling. And that requires preparation. That requires discipline. That requires the kind of strength that only comes when we deny the flesh to feed the spirit. So now, the question is no longer what I saw. The question is, what will you do with what you have just heard? Will you dismiss it? Will you walk away unchanged, treating this as just another story, another testimony, another moment of inspiration that fades as soon as life becomes busy again? Or will you respond? Because if you are feeling something stir in your spirit, if you are sensing that this message was meant for you, then it is. God is calling you deeper. He is calling you to fast. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of desperation for more of Him. Because those who answer this call, those who return to fasting, those who seek Him in prayer and sacrifice, they will be the ones who stand unshaken in the days to come. And when the world is falling apart, when fear is consuming those who are unprepared, when the battle intensifies beyond what we ever imagined, those who have fasted, those who have prayed, those who have walked in the power of the Spirit, they will rise. They will be the ones who carry heaven's fire. And they will not be moved. If my testimony has touched your heart, if you feel that this message was meant for you, don't keep it to yourself. Help spread this revelation so that more people can understand the power of fasting and prayer. Like this video to let us know that this message resonated with you. Share it with your friends, family, or anyone who needs to hear this today. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful testimonies and revelations. Comment below. What part of this testimony impacted you the most? Have you ever experienced the power of fasting in your life? Let's create a space for encouragement and faith in the comments. God is awakening His people, and you are part of this movement. Now is the time to seek Him like never before.